All right, thank you so much. And thank you all for coming out here, staying in, I guess, and joining us today. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. Squid have always been something I've been interested in. So today I'm going to talk to you just about the two largest species of squid, which are the giant squid and the colossal squid. So one of the questions I frequently get when I start talking about squid at a shell museum is, why are you talking about squid at a shell museum? Sam already kind of touched on this a little bit. Here at the Shell Museum, we don't just study seashells. We study all of the animals in the phylum Mollusca. So that's a huge group of animals. It includes a lot of the animals that you know they're seashells, so things like a giant clam or a cute little local fighting conch, things like abalone, coquinas, a local paper fig that we've got up here. But it also includes a lot of other animals that don't necessarily make a shell. So things like slugs. This is a blue velvet head shield slug. Octopuses, squids. So there's a lot of animals within this phylum Mollusca that don't make a shell. They don't grow a shell, but their ancestors did. They share common ancestors with these shelled mollusks that we're a little more familiar with. So when you're asking why are you talking about squid at a shell museum, we actually study all mollusks here. We don't just study the shelled ones. But if we called ourselves the Bailey Matthews National Mollusk Museum, we probably wouldn't have anybody come. So we stick with shells because that is the bulk of kind of what we do, the shelled mollusks. But we do study some other cool stuff as well. So the cephalopods. Cephalopods are a small group within that big group mollusks. And they include some things that you probably are familiar with, but you probably just didn't know they were related. Squid, cuttles or cuttlefish, octopuses, and nautilus. So all of these animals are all related to each other in this class cephalopods. And then that's within this bigger, broader group, the phylum Mollusca. So I want to talk a little bit about some basics with squid before I go into the specifics on these two big ones, because I'm going to use some terms and talk about some features that might be a little confusing if we don't just talk about some of this basic stuff first. So this is kind of a pretty typical squid. When we talk about the body of the animal, we actually use this word mantle. And if you're familiar with gastropods and bivalves, you're familiar with that term mantle. But it's not quite exactly the same thing in squids. So with squids, we talk about this whole body piece being the mantle, whereas with a gastropod or a bivalve, you're just talking about one tissue layer. So with this, it's basically the body. Squid also have fins. That's their main mode of locomotion. Next, they have the head, which has two very well-developed eyes in it. And then attached to that are arms and tentacles. The arms and tentacles are evolutionary ancestors, evolutionary modifications from the foot. So this word cephalopod means head foot, because the foot, which is now arms and tentacles, is attached directly to the head. So a very different body plan than mammals. It goes body, head, appendages. So kind of a weird alien-like setup. So they have 8 arms. Each of the arms is covered with suckers all the way from the tip up to the base. And then they also have 2 tentacles. Tentacles have a long stalk that doesn't have any suckers on it at all. And then they have a club, which is where the suckers are. So if you're kind of going like, what's the best analogy on human anatomy? The tentacles are a little bit more like our arm. There's a big area for reaching and then kind of a hand. The actual arms, we don't really have a good analogy for that on human anatomy. So they actually are different. Arms and tentacles are different. So squid have 8 arms and 2 tentacles. So this is the top side of a squid. Basically, if you were in a boat looking down at the ocean, this is what you would see. If you were a scuba diver and you were laying down at the bottom looking up at a squid, this is what you would see. So this is kind of what's called the ventral, kind of the bottom portion. So again, they've got the mantle and the fins and the head with the eyes. They have what's called a collar. This is kind of an opening where water can be drawn into the mantle cavity, the body cavity. And then they have a siphon, sometimes called a funnel. This is only for excurrent, only for waste and used water to come out of. So if you're familiar with gastropod siphons, on gastropods, it's in current. They're breathing water in for breathing and for smelling. On a squid, that siphon is just for pushing water out. And they can actually do jet propulsion with this. So they can jet themselves backwards really quickly if they need to get away from something. And this is also where ink comes out of. So a lot of people know about squid inking. This is where the ink would come out of. All right, a little bit about measurement. Since I'm going to talk about, the biggest squid, you should know what we're talking about when we say biggest. There's a few different measurements that are used on squid. With scientists, we're most interested in this mantle length up here. So, oops, excuse me. The mantle goes from the very top of the fins down to the bottom of the mantle. This is important for science because there's a rigid part in here that means no matter how you preserve it, no matter what happens, this length is probably going to stay the same over the years. There's another distance called the standard length, which includes the whole mantle plus the head and the arms. That's not super commonly used. And then you have the total length, which is the whole body, the head, the arms, and the tentacles. That's what most people are familiar with when they think of the total size of an animal. This is what most people are thinking of, the total length. The reason this isn't really used that frequently in science is because these soft body parts can really easily change both after the animal dies, during preservation. They can be stretched and pulled. So there's a lot of changes that can take place with these soft body parts. But today when I talk to you about lengths, I'm going to talk about total length because for most people listening, that's probably the most meaningful measurement that I can give. A few other cool pieces. There are some hard pieces, and I'm going to talk a little bit. This will become obvious why these are important later. So animals, squid, have a mouth, and you've got the eye here. This is the head. Here's the arms and the tentacles. The mouth is tucked up inside of here. And if you kind of pull back all the arms and tentacles, there's this big bulb and web, and you can pull back that some more, and there's a beak. This beak is very much like a bird beak in composition and shape and structure. It's very, very similar to a bird beak, and it's used just as a bird beak is. It's to bite off pieces of their food. Inside of there's this cool body part called a radula, which kind of looks like it'd be in the place where a tongue is. But you can see all these spikes sticking off of it. And under a scanning electron microscope, you can see all these teeth that it's covered in. So instead of chewing their food, once they bite off a piece, they rasp off little bits at a time. So this kind of rasps and kind of slurps and swallows their food. So instead of chewing, that's how they're doing it. So these hard beaks will become a little more obvious when I'm talking about them a little bit later on. All right, so let's get into it. The giant squid. So the giant squid is the longest invertebrate on the planet, and invertebrates make up about 95% of all of the animals on the planet. The largest, so for kind of comparison, the largest land mammal is the elephant. So that's something that a lot of people are really familiar with. We've got the largest invertebrate on the planet is the giant squid, and most people aren't really that familiar with it. It has a scientific name, Architeuthis, which kind of means main squid. If you come into the museum and you look at our replica that Sam was talking about, it's nicknamed Archie, and that's because of this genus name, Architeuthis. Average lengths for these animals are somewhere from 20 to 40 feet. There have been some records at 60 feet, but 20 to 40 is kind of what we generally stick with, and kind of a little more on this 20 to 30 side, but they can get a little bit bigger. And again, that's total length. So from tip to tip, like most people would think of. This is a picture of me next to a plastinated giant squid. So this animal was a real animal that underwent a process to replace the water in the tissue for preservation, so it can be preserved out of a jar. And you can see that the body and the head of the animal is about the same length as I am. I'm 5'5", so this is about 5 feet long. So when we're talking about giant squid being 20, 30, 40 feet long, the bulk of that is in these super long appendages, these long arms and these long tentacles. This is another female squid, and this one's got a lot bulkier body, so they can be beefed up a little more from this one over here. But they're usually, not more than a couple 100 pounds. Like a 500-pound giant squid's pretty good. And then all the arms are just kind of folded up and pulled together in this vat. So they also have beaks and sucker rings. This is an adult's hand holding a giant squid beak. So this is what their mouth part looks like that's ripping off pieces of meat to eat. Within their sucker rings, they have these rings, these hard rings of hard teeth that they use to help grab onto their prey so their prey doesn't get away. Most squid have these. Most squid, though, they're really, really small. On the giant squid, these can be an inch across. And they can actually leave marks on their main predators. This is a sperm whale that had been washed up, you know, a beach sperm whale, and you can actually see the sucker ring marks. So giant squid are frequently eaten by sperm whales, and they will fight back. So generally, these sucker rings are for grasping their prey and for eating something, but they will use them to fight back if something's trying to eat them. So why don't we know more about giant squid? Why aren't they something we frequently see? A big part of it is that they don't live where we're hanging out. Their distribution tends to be like 1,000 to 3,000 feet. So that, you know, that's well beyond scuba diving. That's not a place that we generally are coming into contact with them. They are found all over the world, generally on areas that have steep slopes. So think of like Hawaii is a really steep slope. It's a mountain coming out of the ocean. But they're not found in tropical areas. So we don't find them in Hawaii, but some of the hot spots around the world that we do find them are New Zealand, Japan, Norway, Nova Scotia. There's a few other kind of hot spots, but those are kind of the big ones. So we don't tend to see them right around the tropics, you know, around the equator, and we don't tend to see them around the poles, so the North Pole and the South Pole. But we do find them worldwide, and for a long time it was kind of, you know, back and forth. Are these different species? Do we have subspecies? You know, is it just little small pockets of it? And a study that came out, I believe in 2014, did a bunch of DNA analysis on all sorts of specimens from all over the world. And they proved that, yes, it actually is just one species from around the entire world, which is not super common when you look at species of animals on the planet. Most have just kind of small areas that they tend to be in. So what are your chances of seeing one? Pretty bad, simply because of how deep they are. But they actually are in the Gulf of Mexico. So my hopes and dreams of someday finding a giant squid washed up here on Sanibel are not completely unrealistic. In 1954 was the first specimen that was found. It was actually found up by Louisiana in really bad shape, not looking good. It was kind of wondered, like, did it even live here, or did it kind of get washed in from further out in the Caribbean? It's just been kind of floating in the Gulf for a while. Kind of put that to rest in 2009. NOAA, which is the National Ocean and Atmospheric Association, was doing some scientific trawls trying to study what whale diets were. So whales come into the Gulf, what are they eating? So they were doing some scientific trawls, and they picked up what was live when they got it in the net, giant squid that was just shy of 20 feet long. And this was also up around Louisiana. So this wasn't something that, like, oh, it just drifted here, we're not sure how long it's been here. This is something that definitely was living its life off the coast of Louisiana, so really properly in the Gulf of Mexico. In 2014, there was another kind of partial specimen found outside Texas. Some fishermen found it. They thought it was like a huge plastic bag floating on the surface. So it was in really bad condition. And then a big finding in 2019 that I'll talk about a little bit more in just a couple of more slides. So what do we know about these animals is pretty scant. The juveniles and the growth, there's kind of some estimates that they might grow to 3 to 5 years maybe, based on some, you know, some inferences from other species, but that's definitely not been 100% concretely proven. So even just things as basic as how long do these live is a common question that we just don't have the answer to. And we see that across the board with a lot of mollusks, even our local stuff. It's a really common question we get at our programs. And for most of them, the research just isn't done. We just don't know how old they grow to be. What to me is really fascinating fact is that we have known about giant squid for thousands of years, and yet we basically know nothing about them. More than likely, the myth of the kraken probably came about because of giant squid sightings. So, that myth goes back thousands of years. And, we've got giant squid attacking a submarine in 20,000 leagues under the sea. That was before anybody had even seen a live one, or, at least gotten photos of a live one. So it's been part of at least Western culture for several hundred years. Hold on just a second. Someone turned the lights out on me. Okay, well, now we know for certain that turning off the exhibit lights does turn off the layer lights. All right. So yeah, we've known about this animal for thousands of years, and we don't even know how old they live. So there's still just this mystery around these animals that I personally find super, super cool, super fascinating. So I'm going to go over some quote unquote recent discoveries. And I say recent because we just talked about the fact that we've known about them for thousands of years. So if we were talking about, say, technology or DNA discoveries, and I tried to bring up something from 2001 as a recent discovery, it'd probably be more considered archaic rather than recent. But when we're on the scale of, 2,000 years of this animal, studying this animal, I'm going to go ahead and accept 20 years as recent. So in 2001, the first juveniles were captured alive. And this was part of a research by Dr. O'Shea down in New Zealand. And this is one of the little babies that they caught. It's probably about 1 centimeter long, about the size of maybe your pinky fingernail. This is it after it's been preserved. But this was the first ever time that live giant squid had been captured. And it was 2001 and it was a baby. They weren't even, the big adult ones, which is, for most enthusiasts, kind of really what they would want to see. In 2002, the first photo of a live adult ever was taken. And this one really excites me because there was a fisherman in Japan out fishing at night, and he looked down and there was a giant squid underneath him. And he got the first photo ever of a live giant squid. So, the idea that you can be out just kind of doing some fun stuff and be the first person ever to find a discovery or see something, that's not a crazy thought. There's still so much out there that we don't know. So this giant squid was in very obvious distress and doing poorly. An animal that's supposed to be found at over 1,000 feet deep, crawling around on rocks. That's not a normal sign of a healthy animal. You can see some of, this tissue, all these abrasions here. This was the middle of the night, so they weren't able to get a hold of anybody. So what they did was they tied up the animal and tied it to the rocks so that it was there for scientists to come back to the next morning. By the time the scientists got there, the animal had passed away, had died. But to be honest, it was going to anyways. Like, this animal was not going to make it if they were to take it out and float it or something. That animal was not going to recover from all of this damage. In 2004, the first photos of a live healthy adult ever were taken. This was also in Japan by Dr. Kubadero, another giant squid specialist. His method, what he did is he would go out on a boat, put down a bait line, and then hanging just above it was a camera box. And then this is a little laser that's commonly used in underwater videography to help with sizing things, between distance and sizing. So he has these underwater video cameras that take photos every, 30 seconds or so. And they just kind of go out there for an entire day. And there's no live feed. So they have to bring the whole thing back up, and then they've got to go to the lab and they've got to analyze all the footage. So they don't really know what footage they have when they go out and find it. And this time in 2004, when he got back to the lab, they actually had footage for the very first time of a live giant squid, healthy, feeding, in its normal habitat. So I remember when I was in college when this happened, and for me and some of my friends, it was just like super, super cool, big news. In 2006, the first live captured adult and the first video of the adult was found. And this was, again, Dr. Kubadero in Japan. And he was using the same method, the baited line with a camera very close to it. And again, they still didn't have a live feed. So as they were pulling up this camera at the end of the day, they could feel something pulling against it. They knew they had something on the line, just like a fisherman, or you feel the pull of something against your hook. So they knew there was something fighting against them, and they were bringing up something big. So they had the good foresight to get their cameras out before they actually pulled it all the way up. And when they got to the surface, it was this giant squid trying to eat their bait squid, and it just hadn't ever let go, and it didn't want to give away this free meal that it had found. You can see the eye of the animal, this bright red coloration up on the top here, as well as some kind of different coloration down here. So this is the first live capture, and they did get video footage of this adult. Another really huge big discovery was in 2012. That was when the first underwater video footage was taken of this animal. This was a huge undertaking by the Discovery Channel, and it was a cooperative effort between Dr. O'Shea out of New Zealand, Dr. Kubadero out of Japan, and Dr. Edith Winter out of the States. And they all three of them had different hypotheses over what was the best way to try and lure a giant squid. So there was some that was looking at bait and some that was looking at reproductive hormones. What actually ended up being the one that succeeded was lights. So it's kind of this like light up disco ball looking thing. And that's what attracted this live giant squid. And it stayed and it hung out there. You can see this beautiful coloration. All of the skin is looking intact and beautiful with this eerie kind of iridescent to it. And a very different color than what we saw in all the other specimens, where they're kind of stressed out and they're at the surface and they've turned this bright red color. So this was a really huge kind of check mark off the list of giant squid fans out there, finally seeing underwater healthy videos of a giant squid. Now in 2019, something that was a little more cool for us locals, Dr. Edith Winter again went out, this time with NOAA, using that same light ball, and was able to get footage of a live giant squid attacking that light ball out in the Gulf of Mexico. So again, healthy footage of an animal in its natural habitat. But this was, for me, this was really exciting because it was local stuff. So again, the small possibility that someday I could go out on a beach walk and find a giant squid is something that that really is always in the back of my mind as something exciting that could happen. So with the giant squid, there's still just so much that we don't know. I mean, the fact that just getting footage of them is huge, groundbreaking work should hopefully tell you just how much we don't know about them. Their growth rates. We know that they start out about 1 centimeter long, and we know that they get to 20, 30, 40 feet, possibly in just a few years. It's kind of unknown. How do you get that much energy? How do you get that much food, especially when you're out in these areas that most people think of as kind of being few and far between of all these different animals? And then the other thing of just how does a body allow that growth to happen? Most animals that we've studied have kind of natural checks in place when there's runaway growth. It's a natural protection against cancers and things like that. If cells really start replicating way too quick, there's usually some natural processes that can shut that down, but these animals obviously don't have that. There's something allowing them to grow in this just exponential growth. How do they reproduce? Do they create an egg mass or an egg sac? Those are both two very common reproductive methods in squid, and we're not sure which one these ones do. Is there any type of migration going on, either up and down within the water column from daytime to nighttime, or from different areas at different times of year? Like I said before, we really don't know what the firm age is on these. What kind of population dynamics are there? There's some evidence based on some DNA research that possibly the populations really have increased over the past 100 years or so, possibly because of whaling. If we killed all these sperm whales, and sperm whales were their main predators, you would expect the prey item to have a big surge in its population. But without a lot of historical data, that can be hard to say whether or not the populations truly have increased or not. So there's still so many what most people think of as basic facts that we take for granted in so many other species that we just have no clue about. And this is the longest invertebrate on the planet. So kind of the take home of this is it's kind of impressive what we still don't know and what we still have out there to discover. All right, so let's talk about the other big behemoth, the colossal squid. So this is a different species, even a different group of squid. This is the heaviest invertebrate on the planet. So it's not very long, but it's really, really bulky. And this is relatively new to science. This species was only described in 1925. We haven't even known about this big animal for 100 years yet. In 1925, it was described just based on 2 tentacle stalks. So somebody found these huge tentacle stalks. They were obviously not giant squid tentacle stalks, and they were obviously way bigger than anything else we knew of. So they were able to say, like, this is a new species, even just off this tiny little bit of proportionally of the animal that was found. So one of the reasons that we only found out about it 100 years ago is because they live down in Antarctica. So we really just haven't been in a place to interact with them until, you know, the past 100 years or so. So now we're starting to see them because of mostly commercial fishery enterprises down around the Arctic area. And this specimen is something that I'll be coming back to, but this was caught by fishermen down in Antarctica fishing for toothfish. And this one was eating some of their toothfish and just didn't let go when they started pulling it up. So again, they have beaks and sucker rings. Again, in the center there, you can see adults' hands there with how big this animal is, how big that beak is. They also have sucker rings for grabbing onto their food, and some of their sucker rings have been super highly modified into this big kind of saber-like tooth. So when we're looking at this this sperm whale, and you're seeing, okay, those are obviously sucker rings. These other ones that kind of look like maybe Wolverine came along and scraped at it, those might be from these long hooks on a colossal squid. So yeah, you can see how beat up this animal is. Some of that's coming from squid fighting back. Juveniles in growth. We don't know anything about that, so I just included a cool picture. This is a picture of us preparing that that colossal squid specimen to go on display at a museum. So putting it into its final holding bin. The history of these animals. So I already told you that we only first found out about this animal in 1925. Between 1925 and 2007, there are 10 quote unquote mostly complete subadults. So up until 2007, we've never found any adults, never found fully complete intact specimens. There's only 10 of them. So just absolutely hardly anything known about these animals. In 2007, that's when this big specimen was caught, that live one that was caught by the fishing boat. This was the first ever complete specimen, the largest specimen ever seen, the first fully mature specimen ever seen, the first live caught specimen. So this one animal checked off just like all these boxes of new records. The total length of the animal is only 14 feet, which isn't, super long when you compare it to the giant squid, but it weighed over 1,000 pounds. So it's just got this really bulky, beefy body that the giant squid is much more slender. There is a really cool special about this that you can find on the Discovery Channel. It kind of goes on and off of Netflix sometimes. And then this animal is actually on display at Te Papa, which is the National Natural History Museum in New Zealand. So if y'all are ever in Wellington, you can go check out this big beast. Unknown aspects, pretty much everything. We know very, very little about this. We've never even seen like a good male specimen of it. Most of what we know about these animals comes from whale gut contents. So remember how I kept talking about the beaks? The beaks are hard parts, and they're not easily digestible, and they're not easily passable. So when whales eat stuff, there's a lot of stuff that stays in the stomach. And when a whale gets stranded or beached or something, after every attempt is made to save it, once the animal dies, there's another group of scientists that will come out, cut open the animal, and look at its stomach and open it up and see what's in there. And we see a lot of headlines, now that is about the terrible stuff we see in there about plastics and nets and all this awful stuff. Well, originally what these scientists had gone in there starting to look for is what were they actually eating as part of their natural food source. And all of these are squid beaks that came from one whale stomach. And the good thing about squid beaks is they are different by species. So each one of these can be identified to what species it came from. And if you know where the whale is going, or vice versa, if you know where the squids are from, you can tell, if you know where the squids are from, you can tell where the whale is going. Vice versa, if you know where the whale is going, you can start to get a better range on what some of these squid are doing. So both with giant squid and particularly with colossal squid, a ton of what we know about them is coming from these beaks that are left over inside particularly sperm whale gut contents. And when we look at that big, bulky, colossal squid that was huge, the biggest one we've seen so far, there are beaks in whale stomachs that have been found from that species that are much, much bigger than that. So we know that one that was, really big and impressive isn't even as big as they get. So with this, particularly this species, the unknown aspects are just kind of baffling when we think about this biggest, heaviest invertebrate on the planet that we really know nothing about and we've hardly ever seen. And for a lot of scientists, that's where we get really excited. A lot of people, they just want the answers to things. But a lot of people that are curious about science and want to go into science, it's the unknown that really excites us, and the chance to get to learn something new and to get to see something that no one else has seen before. So hopefully you enjoyed that. Hopefully you learned something new. And really, hopefully, I hope you got excited about it. And hope maybe you'll get interested in some things that we still have a lot of discoveries yet with.
Thank you, Becca. It's terrific. That's a really good point about how much there is to learn. And that's one of the enduring cool things about science, is that there's just still so much to explore. I'd actually had never heard of the colossal squid before before starting to get familiar with your program. Mm-hmm. And it's just amazing that something that large and incredible could still be such a mystery.
Yeah.
So for these animals of the major deep, but then also for mollusks, broadly speaking, depending on who you talk to, right? There are 50, 80,000 species of mollusks out there, and many of which we know very little about. And so the research and the learning goes on. Some questions have come in, and I'll start with Mindy's, which is, how is global warming affecting giant squid and in general total squid population? Mm-hmm. Do we know if their habitat is moving?
Yeah, so there's a lot of kind of burgeoning research on this. And again, like with most things in climate change and ocean acidification and stuff, there's still a lot of learning left to be done. But there is definitely concrete signs that ranges are changing, and particularly that sizes of animals are changing. And there's some really good research actually going on up in Woods Hole about squid statolith development with ocean acidification. So the statolith is kind of a natulus to our ear bones. It's an inner ear type thing, and it's really, 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 really tiny, but it's what helps keep them balanced in the water. It's how they know like what's up and down. But it's so thin, it makes it really, really susceptible to changes in pH, which is what ocean acidification is. So there's some really interesting science coming out about that it's not looking good, like most of the ocean acidification and climate changes, that it could really change that development that would then just completely change behaviors. There's some really interesting stuff going on with the Humboldt squid out in California, that there have been these just kind of huge changes in sizes and kind of a loss of population with something else coming in. And they're really not sure exactly what it is, what caused it, but most likely, just like in any kind of ecology problem, it's probably more than one thing. It's probably multiple factors playing on each other and amplifying each other to end up with this one noticeable thing that's happening.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. This question from Kimberly. Can you talk more, do you know more about the preparation of the colossal squid at Te Papa Museum in Wellington for public viewing?
Yeah. So that was actually one of the very first things that I got to help with when I started my master's. I wasn't there for the necropsy and stuff that they did, but they had to put it in the freezer while that specially made viewing container got created. So by the time I got there, that was done. So we had to put it in this big sling and move it from the container it was in into this new container. The big thing was injecting it with alcohol and preservative. If you just put it in the vat and put that alcohol in, it will just rot from the inside. And you can end up obviously with some very bad issues going on if something's rotting from the inside out. So the coolest part of that, which was new to me, was having to actually get the preservatives inside with just these massive hypodermic needles and just like taking it and stabbing it and, you know, injecting all of this into it.
Wow. From Jennifer, you mentioned the red color when squid are distressed. What are their normal colors?
A lot of times they're kind of almost grayish, almost like a neutral tone. They use that color changing, just like other cephalopods, for a lot of communication, not just with predator and prey, but with each other. They do a lot of communicating through their skin color. And different squid have different color ranges that they can do, but a lot of them, the kind of neutral, natural color is this kind of like anywhere from like silvery gray to beige.
And I guess that image you had of the live squid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it had that kind of
silver kind of tone. Angie has a question. Any evidence that they are cannibalistic like Humboldt squid?
I feel like I do have an answer to that off the top of my head. There probably is some going on, especially I would think during mating. But I don't have something off the top of my head to say yes. But if somebody told me yes, there is, it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah. Another question from Jennifer. Other than the sperm whale and humans, what are their predators?
At smaller sizes, they have a lot of other predators, different types of sharks, other squid, other types of big squid. There's actually a really cool photo of a great white shark that just came out a couple of years ago that had sucker marks on its face. And it was kind of some of the first evidence that a great white shark would actually attack a full-grown giant squid. So at younger sizes, when they're still small, kind of any predator that's bigger than it will eat them. But yeah, once they get bigger, there isn't really a whole lot that they have to be concerned about.
Great. Two more questions. First from Gail. In a World Cup race, a boat was stopped by a squid-like animal. Did you hear of this?
I have not heard of this.
Okay.
And I would be very skeptical. It grabbed onto it and stopped it?
That could be. Yeah, maybe it's the kraken.
Yeah.
Okay. And lastly, from Helen, what do squid eat?
Squid are all carnivores, so they're hunters. They're eating smaller species of squid. Most of them, since they're out in the open water, maybe smaller species of really smaller or younger species of shark, and then fish. Lots of different fish.
Well, great. Well, thank you, Becca. There was also a question from Kelly. Will there be other cephalopod Zooms? And the answer is we hope so. None on the calendar right now, but stay tuned to the emails and social media and shellmuseum.org for updates. Be sure to register for the August 24th program and the September 16th program, and look for details to register to the ones later into the fall. So thank you very much for joining us for this program. Thank you, Becca, for a great presentation.
Thank you.
And we'll look forward to seeing you all next time and at the museum, and have a good evening.